south, and we're going to focus in here on the medieval period, so 1250 to 1500. We know this is also called the Middle Ages. So just to be clear, as I say, we're going to focus on the medieval period for this section. Remembering that we've got to make sure we understand the beliefs and attitudes and values of the time, what local and national government's role was and how that worked, the impact of science and technology, urbanisation, so the growth of towns and cities, and wealth and poverty. It's these factors that play a key role when we're looking at what's going on in each time period. So if we start with the medieval period, we know that the medieval mind was a key belief in God and the church. Every person in England went to church, was a member of the Roman Catholic Church, and anything that happened in people's life, they linked directly to God and the church itself. So if if people suffered disease or illness, it was seen as God's punishment. There wasn't an understanding at this time of science or particularly technology. So kind of illnesses and things that went on in people's lives was all linked to religion. Now, the other understanding around beliefs and attitudes to link to kind of people's health and disease was this idea of miasma. This thought that the air was kind of a form of poison, and that invisible poison in the air, and they called the poisoned air miasma. And we've got monks writing in 1240 about the ideas and saying if the vapour in the air is malicious, stinking and corrupt, that's what kind of causes people to get ill. Okay. And then finally, we see this idea of that you're vulnerable to disease if your humours are out of balance. There's this belief around the fact that your body had 4 different liquids in it, and if those humours that were out of balance, that caused disease. So this underpins all actions in terms of the local national government and in terms of kind of how people respond to epidemics, their beliefs and attitudes at the time. Now, in terms of the local and national government, the structure of society at this time, we know it's a hierarchy. We've got the kings at the very top of this medieval hierarchy. People believe that God had put kings on earth to rule over them and keep them safe. And kings taxed their people and used this money to live in particularly grand style, actually. Below them, we've got kind of barons who would then share their land amongst knights. And then below all that, we've got your kind of regular people, if you like, your labourers who were servants to the kings and their lords, and they were like the peasants. Majority of people at this time would live off the land. Okay, and we know 90% of the population lived in the countryside. Money that we know that the king's court was used kind of not to help people and kind of improve society, but for fighting wars. And in terms of how people lived then, again, we know this is quite a limited form of technology at the time. Everything's made by hand. It's mainly windmill and water mills that were seen as the most powerful machinery of the day. All right. Yes, we've got change over time, and we see the printing press invented in the 1470s, but that is it in terms of science and technology. And then lastly, those other 2 factors, well, we do see some change in terms of urbanisation, but majority of towns were really, really small. Okay, as we've talked about, 90% of people lived in the countryside. We don't see that change in terms of vast urbanisation until much later on. And they think there was only about 15 towns in England with more than 10,000 people living in them. So they were small, but they could be crowded on market days. And peasants from surrounding villages would come to these markets to sell any spare produce for cash. And it would be these areas where you'd find craftsmen and people kind of going about their business in terms of selling different goods. And within those towns, we know that we see the development of what are called guilds, bodies controlling the price of goods, whether that's cloth or food or ales. So, as I say, there were towns, but these were very small in comparison to what we see much later on. And then finally, with wealth and poverty, big issue of this time, Your diet, your housing, your waste, your water, all depended on your wealth. Okay? And we know as a fact of life is that as people lived off the land, and especially if you were poor or we suffered like harvest failure, that could often lead to death.